On this next graph, we have to sketch the graph of 2 times sine 3 theta. So again, we are going to look at first the amplitude. And I know that the amplitude will be 2. The amplitude equals 2. So my graph will be stretched vertically. And because I have my sine 3 theta, horizontally the graph is going to be shrunk. So the first thing I do again, I'm going to graph a regular normal sine graph with an amplitude of 2 using the major points. So at 0, I'm going to graph my 0. At pi over 2, which is right here, pi over 2, we are going to have 2. At pi, we have 0. At 3 pi over 2, we are going to have negative 2. And at 2 pi, we have 0 again. So here is one cycle of my sine graph with an amplitude of 2. So now I'm going to continue to the left-hand side also. And finish the graph. And now I need to shrink the graph horizontally. So that means I have 2 pi over 3 for one period. So here is my 0, and this will be my last point. So now I'm going to divide this into 4 equal parts. So I'm going to have, right here, I'm going to have my 2 and my 0, my negative 2 and my 0. So one cycle of that graph is going to be right here. And then I can do my second cycle, which will occur right here. So I have a 0, and I will have 2 and negative 2. Again, I divided it into 4 parts. So here is my second cycle of the sine graph. And all I have to do is do my last cycle. So again, I divided into 4 parts. So here is 1. It's actually 2, sorry. And then this is 0, negative 2, and 0. So I'm going to graph that last cycle of the sine graph. So if you notice that over the 2 pi period, I have one cycle of sine, then a second cycle, and then a third cycle of a sine graph. And I can do the same thing going to the left. So if I do go to the left, here is where I am going to have the 4 markings. So here I will have negative 2, 0, 2, and 0. So here is my first cycle. So I'm going like that. Then again I have negative 2, 0, 2, and 0. So I go for the second cycle. And then I go for the last one. So again, if I go towards the negative 2 pi direction, I will have 3 graphs over the negative 2 pi. This next graph is y equals 1/3 times cosine theta. So in this case, I need to graph an amplitude of 1/3, and my entire graph is going to occur over 2 pi. So the amplitude is 1/3, and it occurs over 2 pi, one cycle, because there's no multiplier for theta. So I'm going to start right away with the graph. So at 0, I will have, normally at 0, I would have 1 for cosine, but because I multiply by 1/3, it's going to be 1/3. And then I would have pi over 2, I would have 0 for cosine. Then at pi, I would have -1 for cosine, but then I'm going to multiply by 1/3, so that's going to be -1/3. And then at 3 pi over 2, again, we are going to have 0. And at 2 pi, we are going to have 1/3. So I'm going to graph a graph that is kind of a shallow kind of cosine graph. So continuing on this side, we're going to end up at 1/3. In the last example, we are going to graph y equals 1/2 sine 2 theta. I know that the amplitude is going to be half, so that means vertically we are shrinking the graph. As well as horizontally we are shrinking the graph to 2 theta. So our amplitude is going to be 1/2, and 2 pi over 2 will give me pi. So that means one cycle or one period will occur over pi. So the first thing I will do is graph in black the graph which is 1/2 sine theta. So I'm going to have at 0, I have 0. And I am going to have at pi over 2, I will have 1/2. Then at pi, I have 0 again. 3 pi over 2, I will have -1/2. And at 2 pi, I will have 0. And I'm going to continue in the opposite direction also. So I have -1/2, 0, 1/2, and 0. So now I'm going to connect my points and have the 1/2 sine graph. And after this, I need to shrink the graph to half as long. So I need to shrink it to a period of over 1 pi. So I'm going to have, here is going to be my last point. If I take the half of that, is right here, and the half of that is here and here. So I'm going to start at 0, and here is where I'm going to have 1/2. Then I have 0 again, and then I have -1/2 and 0. So now I can graph my graph like that. And then I need to graph a second part of the graph. So again, I'm going to split this into, here's my half and here are my other halves or quarters. So I'm going to have a half over here, 0, -1/2, and 0. So here is our second cycle for the sine graph. So we have 2 sine graphs over a period of 2 pi, and we can continue this to the left. So I'm going to have again half and half of that, half of that. So we have -1/2, 0, and 1/2 and 0. And then again we have -1/2. Then we have 0 and 1/2 and 0. So I'm going to continue to the opposite direction. So let's go ahead and graph the sine graph. in this direction. So you can see that you have 2 cycles or 2 periods over the 2 pi.